Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the bomber number LB4390C 454-630 is what this is. That is a long part number just to say this is a spring hinge. This is, however, not your garden variety spring hinge because this is a 630 finish, and that means stainless steel. It also means that the base material is solid stainless. Let's dissect the part number. LB means lube bearing from Bomber. It's a maintenance-free, concealed bearing sort of construction from Bomber on their single-acting spring hinges. I believe, well, not all of their single-acting spring hinges are LB, but the traditional, or the more, I should say, the commercial style that you'll see in modern spring hinges will be an LB hinge from Bomber. The 4390C, all that conspires to mean that it is a C for contract grade, meaning that it will be commercial grade thickness, and on this hinge, that leaf thickness is 134 thousandths. The 4390 conspires to mean that this hinge is full mortise, that this hinge is template pattern, meaning that the location of the screw holes is template pattern. And it even means that the base material is stainless steel. So buried in the 4390 means that it is contract grade, well, 4390C, 134 thousandths leaf thickness, template pattern on the screw holes, square corner is also inferred, and stainless base material. This hinge is also available in either a 1/4 inch radius and 5/8 radius as well. I don't recall the last time I've sold a radius corner solid stainless spring hinge, but they're not uncommon because you'll have a job, large hotel or condo building on the coast, and you're doing commercial grade doors, and that material is generally going to be a non-ferrous based type of material. Okay, the -454 in the part number, that specifically is a reference to the size. That means that you're dealing with a 4.5 inch tall hinge by 4 inch wide. Now it's important to know that the height is the first dimension. You don't want to think of it as a door like the width and then the height. Hinges are the height and then the width. So it's important to understand that 4.5 by 4 means it's 4.5 tall by 4 wide. The -630, that means two things. That means first that the base material is solid stainless, and that it is in a satin or a brushed finish. Okay, this is a grade 1 hinge, UL listed. Grade 1 simply means that, significantly, it means that this hinge has been tested to 1,000,000 cycles and not to have failed. This is a single acting spring hinge, and that's very common. Now why? The one thing less common about this is the fact that it's 4 inch wide. Why you might want that? Well, I can't think of a specific reason in terms of this, except that some people, quite frankly, believe, and I don't disagree, that the look of the hinge is nicer when it is a hinge that does not project out as far on the face of the frame and door than a standard 4.5 by 4.5. The 4.5 by 4 will effectively move the vertical axis of pivoting closer to the face of the frame and door by 1/4 inch. I don't disagree with that at all. I personally don't think of it very often because in my experience 4.5 by 4.5 is just more common. Now you'll run into 4.5 by 4 on aluminum style frames. So if you're doing a project with a lot of aluminum style doors, or you are just doing aluminum, and in that industry 4 inch wide is the standard, industry standard in my experience, then you're going to go with a 4.5 by 4. Aesthetically, I'm not really able to add intelligently to the conversation of what looks better on a door than others. It's personal preference in my opinion. And I suppose with all things equal, I might personally prefer a 4 inch wide hinge if I didn't have any sort of conflict with the door frame, and maybe having that pivot point a bit closer to the face of the door and frame could be and possibly would be considered more elegant. Whatever. So let's move on. This is a template pattern hinge. That means that the screw holes are in what we call a template pattern, with the word template being the active word in that. Now, there is a link below this video to a document called template, not to be confused with the reference to the location of the screw holes. It's just a technical drawing template. So the point is that you can review that drawing and compare it against an existing installation should you need to be sure that you're buying the right pattern of holes for the hinge. That link to the template also calls out that 134 thousandths of an inch leaf thickness. What's also inferred in that part number is the fact that it's a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves here that when they are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame, whether it's steel or wood or aluminum, etc. Now, moving on. Full mortise, we just discussed that. It's contract grade, meaning it's 134 thousandths. UL listed for fire door applications. Although it's my understanding that the base material needs to be non-ferrous. So if you need to be positive whether or not a stainless base hinge is compatible with a true fire rating on a door, feel free to reach out to us and we'll clarify that point. Grade 1 for 1,000,000 cycles. It's non-handed. You can use this on a left-hand or right-hand door, no problem. Self-lubricating bearings, maintenance-free LB construction, easily adjustable spring tension, which we'll get to in a moment. ANSI templated screw hole pattern, that's the reference to the template here. Pivot point aligns with commercial butt hinges that are between 123 and 134 thousandths of an inch. Meaning you have to, if you're going to use a spring hinge, 4.5 by 4, on a door where you're going to have a ball bearing 4.5 by 4, that's okay, provided it's 4.5 by 4 and that the leaf thickness is between 123 and 134 thousandths. It would be 134 thousandths. Stainless steel base material, it's also available in the 629 finish, which is a polished stainless. So just change the 630 to a 629 in the part number. Square corner, 8 holes. Screws are included. Those are also going to be stainless. It is typical that you'll get half wood and all machine screws, and that is indeed the case with this package, even though the stock data from Bomber says that you'll get 8 of each screw. That's really not accurate in my experience. You're going to get all machine screws and half wood screws, so 8 and 4. If you need all wood screws, be sure to specify that in the comment field when you are ordering the hinge, and we'll be sure to pass that note along so that it's packaged properly. Now, also, this spring hinge is recommended for a door up to 3 foot by 7 foot tall or in size, and we're going to get to the tension setting instructions and the usage guide right now. Let's talk about first the usage guide. There is a link below this video to a document called Certifications and Usage Guide, and it's likely going to be included with your order on the box. Should your order come in a box, it will be on the box. Let's go over that. So we're dealing with the 4.5 by 4.5 column, and what Bomber is saying here is that for a door up to 115 pounds, they want 2 spring hinges and 1 butt regular hinge. Make sure it's ball bearing. If your door is beyond that, well, they say 150 pounds. They're looking for all spring hinges. Now, I'm a fan of all spring hinges, and the reasoning is this. I'm not a fan of spring hinges in the first place because I don't believe that they are the proper way to control a door, because the point of a door being a well-behaved door is that you have control over it, and a spring hinge does not allow control. All it really allows you to do is to get the door closed, hopefully, and not all the time. I believe that a hydraulic control, like a surface-mounted door closer, overhead concealed, etc., would be more appropriate for a door installation. But the fact of the matter is, it's not always the case that it's permissible or proper to install an overhead surface-mounted door closer onto a door. You could very likely just simply have a residential application where you have a door let's say an attached garage door, and the client wants stainless steel, and it's a 20-minute fire-rated door, and installing an overhead door closer is impractical in that sort of situation. Spring hinges are not very efficient because while you get the door open, you've got stored energy in the spring, but as it closes, that stored energy really falls off in terms of how much residual energy is still in the spring at the closing cycle. A standard door closer from 0 to 90 will pretty much always, but not always, but pretty much always have two valves, the 15 to 90 degree range and then the 0 to 15. 0 to 15 is the latch valve versus the sweep valve, which is 15 to 90 degree. Now, a spring hinge will do a good job at getting the door through the sweep portion of the closing cycle, 90 down to 15, but it's that last 15 degrees that can prove to be a real challenge for spring hinges. I liken them to a tugboat in the sense that they don't go very fast, but they can pull a lot of weight. And when you have more spring hinges installed on a door rather than less, you'll find that you have a better ability to get that last critical amount of the closing cycle of the door actually latched. So the door has to overcome the weight of the door, the lack of inertia, the surface area of the door and all the wind resistance that it encounters, the friction of the latch bolt hitting the strike plate. Maybe a jam is not plumb, or maybe it's towed in and out, and really what your door is doing is needing to very fractionally lift up and towards, and that will work very much against the spring hinge doing its job. If the one jam is towed this way and your door needs to come up this way to it. So all that can conspire to make it a real challenge for spring hinges. I have found, and also air pressure conditions during seasons. If you have in the summertime windows in the back of the building open, you need different tension on your hinge than you would in the wintertime when everything is closed up. The point of that is, if you have more spring hinges on a door rather than less, you will enjoy a greater amount of control over the door to get it not only into a closed position but properly latched. And if you have a fire-rated door, you have two obligations: to make it self-closing and to make it self-latching. And if it fails in either of those, you don't technically have a fire-rated door. More spring hinges will give you a greater ability to achieve success. Now, I'm not saying that you should right off the bat have all spring hinges when it comes to a very costly commodity like a solid stainless steel spring hinge. But there is truth in saying that you will find greater success when you have more spring power on reserve rather than less. So let's move on. Setting the tension. Very simply, hang the door. Just take your hinges and get the door hung. I personally would put the ball bearing hinge up at the top if you were using two, and put my spring hinge at the middle and bottom is what I would do. The majority of weight pulling down on the door is borne by that top hinge. A spring hinge is not a load-bearing sort of hinge, and you will find that it will give you a different operation if you experimented with two hinges, top and middle, versus middle and bottom. So ball-bearing hinge up at the top, spring, or all spring. Or if it's, not that it's in the chart, but if you had only one spring hinge, I'd put that in the middle. Let's say you had a door that was incredibly light, 50 pounds. You might look for just one spring hinge. Now, setting the tension. With every order that you get, you're going to get a tension rod, that black piece of steel there. With every hinge you order, you're going to get a tension pin. When the hinge is installed with the tension collar pointed towards the top of the door, and you can install it this way, it's not a problem. But when the tension collar is pointed towards the top, you insert that tension rod into one of the holes and turn it clockwise. Okay, and as you turn it clockwise, you will reveal new additional holes. Okay. Of course, if it's this way, turn it counterclockwise. Get the door hung, tension collar to the top, set a couple of holes where the tension, and begin then to test the operation of the door. Now, there is another link called Installation Instructions, which is the appropriate document to look at this point, because it will show you what I just demonstrated with the clockwise rotation of the tension collar with the tension rod. But most importantly, not to exceed 3 holes of tension if your hinge is going to get out to 180 degree sort of opening for your door. Okay. if you're going to get out to just about 90 degree, 4 holes of tension are permissible. And that's the important part. If you are hearing any creaking in the spring and you are at or above those recommended quantity of holes of tension, you're underpowered most likely in the spring department. If the hinge is new, that's generally the case. If you hear any amount of torsion or contortion of the spring, would be something you'd want to back away from and add another spring hinge. If it's an existing hinge, let's say it's a couple years old and you hear that and it's been fine since, it's permissible to get some lubrication down into these joints and lubricate the hinge. That's okay. This being a spring hinge in a stainless steel base material, that steel spring that's in there is indeed made of steel, but it has a coating on the spring that is specifically intended to prevent or significantly reduce oxidation, corrosion, things of that nature. Being a stainless steel hinge, you're using it because you need to take the advantage of the base material, and the spring inside of there is rated for the same sort of exposure that you would otherwise have the hinge itself applied to. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is the Bomber logo. And right above it, it says Made in USA. That's a fact that Bomber is quite proud of, as am I, to represent them. If you have any questions on the Bomber, LB4390C-454-630, stainless steel, full mortise, single acting, contract grade spring hinge, or any other Bomber product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.